Our credit score is so important. I mean, it has its obvious uses. For example, checking for credit, trying to get a credit card, trying to get a loan. But the reason it's so important is more than that, because it can determine your rates of insurance, and a potential employer can check your credit and offer you a job or not based on your credit history. You can be turned down for a home, even just a place to rent, because your credit score is not good. The value of the credit score should never be overlooked. Now, a credit score never made anybody rich. So you can be super wealthy, or you can inherit a lot of money, and your credit score can be bad, or you can have a credit score of 0, and you can still be successful in life. But unfortunately, there are millions of Americans who never had the opportunity to go through personal finance class, or have never had the opportunity to learn the basics. And so having a low credit score affects those individuals in such a profound way. Having a low credit score is just such a negative life experience that getting that credit score up can improve a person's life in massive ways. Determining one's credit score is broken up into 5 separate sections. And while FICO does keep their algorithm secret so that a person's score can't be manipulated, they do give us the basic idea of how it all works. The number one and biggest influence on our credit score at 35% is payment history. So the first one makes sense, right? If we're late paying our bills, then we're more likely to be late on bills that we need to pay in the future. There are a lot of reasons why this is super important, but there are 2 tips that we can learn about late payment. And the first is, look, it happens sometimes. It's happened to me before. I'll forget to make a payment. I'll have a bill that shows up. It'll be on the countertop, and I know I'm really guilty of not wanting to open the mail sometimes. And that's happened before to me, and I have paid a bill that's late. One thing that has worked for me in the past is if you call up that creditor or whoever sent you that bill and said, look, I made a mistake, be super nice, be super friendly with who the customer service representative is, and just, do you mind removing this late payment? Like, I'll pay the bill, but don't report it to the credit company. Don't report it so that it shows up on my credit score. Sometimes, if you're nice, now they're not required to, not required by law, but sometimes that'll work. So if you have a phone bill that you didn't pay, call up Verizon or AT&T or whoever that might be and just say, hey, so sorry, I was late this month, it was a mistake, do you mind removing that from my credit report? Not reporting that to the credit card company or to the credit company. That is one option that I'll use. The second thing in relation to late payments is that, yes, late payments can stay on our credit report for up to 7 years. But the good news, after 6 months of regular payments, a year of regular payments, then that negative mark on our credit report, because we've had late payments in the past, will slowly start to go away, and you will see your credit score go up. Because again, that's a sign that we're diligent. That's a sign that we're back on track. We're making our payments. We're being responsible, that type of thing. The second biggest category, determining our credit score at 30%, is amounts owed, which makes sense. Because if we're up to our eyeballs in debt already, then we're gonna be a massive credit risk. And maybe can't make that new car payment that we're applying for, or actually afford that mortgage that we're wanting to get. But also specifically related to credit cards and revolving loans, so loans where we use a card, or like a home equity loan where we use an amount and then we pay it off, and we use an amount and then we pay it off. The amount of available credit is super important when it comes to our credit score. If the credit reporting agency or FICO looks at our account and sees that we're using 90% or more of our available credit, then they're going to assume that we're tapped out. We don't have much wiggle room in our budget. We're running on the edge, and therefore they're going to lower our score because using 90% or more of our credit is a higher risk to people who might want to give us loans and all the other examples that I mentioned. Now, 50% is also high risk because if you're using 50% of your credit, then that means that maybe this individual is or isn't making good decisions, but it's hard to tell. 30% is kind of the medium mark. So if you're only using 30% of your credit, not great, but the best number that we can shoot for is keeping the available credit that we're using below the 10% mark. So for example, if I have 2 credit cards that both have a $5,000 credit card limit, then together that's a total of $10,000 in available credit that I can use. If my balance at the end of the month is over $9,000, then my score will be low or will drop considerably because I'm using so much of my available credit, over 90%. If my balance is $5,000, that's more than 50% of my available credit and will impact my score negatively. If my balance is over $3,000 at the end of the month, then that will have a moderate impact on my credit score. And if it's under $1,000, again, that's under that 10% mark, then I'm golden. So the way that I personally like to take care of this to make sure that my available credit stays below 10% is I will pay off my credit card weekly, sometimes more. Like, I'm obsessive about this. And your credit card provider has to allow this as well. There are some credit card providers that will only allow you to pay off your bill once a month or twice a month or something like that. But I'll go in and I'll make those payments, so whenever the bill is generated at the end of the month, at the beginning of the month, whenever that might be, the amount that's on my bill is going to be so low in comparison to the amount of credit that I have that it automatically falls below that 10%. Now, maybe I've had a busy month, haven't been able to get to it. If at the end of the month, whenever the credit card company reports to FICO, which assesses our credit score, how much available credit we have left, how much of that we've used, if it's over the 10% mark, then FICO's going to ding our score just a little bit. If it's over 30, they're going to ding a little bit more. Over 50, over 90, they're really going to ding your credit. So the goal is to keep your revolving credit below that 10% mark. The third category affecting our credit score at 15% is our length of credit history. So even though this is a smaller percentage than the 35 and the 30% that we just talked about, the reality is this can also have a pretty big impact on our credit score. And the one thing that I like to tell people is if we have older cards laying around out there, the advice is not to close them, because then that affects the length of credit history that we have, which can negatively impact our score. The last 2 categories are credit mix and new credit, which are both at 10% of the total pie chart. So the first one is credit mix. Now, credit mix is not something that we need to worry about. I mean, theoretically, if you're going to reach a score of 850, then you need to have lots of different types of credit. And the reason that FICO does that is so they can see that we're responsible with a car loan, we're responsible with a personal loan, we're responsible with a HELOC, we're responsible with credit cards, we're responsible with a home mortgage. They want different types of credit that we can use so they can see that we're responsible creditors, not creditors, loanees, whatever the word might be. I'm not concerned with this because I'm not going to pay a bank interest on a loan just to make my score a little bit better. I'm not going to pay money on the front end so that I can save money on the back end. So while credit mix and having more different types of credit will raise our score, the reality is this is a category that I do not want us to focus on. Now, with the new credit category, every time we open up a new credit card or we have a hard inquiry on our credit report, that's going to ding our credit just a little bit. And the thing I want to emphasize with this is that we only need to open credit, or we only need to apply for a loan when we absolutely need to. So if we absolutely have to buy a car, we don't have the cash to pay for it, we're being as frugal as possible, buying as low cost and dependable of a car as possible, that's the only time that we are going or applying for a loan. Same thing with a mortgage, same thing with a HELOC. Like, we need to avoid debt as much as possible in order to be successful financially. But there is one rule that we definitely need to follow, and that's anytime we're going to be applying for a mortgage, or if we're going to be refinancing, we don't want any inquiries on our credit for the past 6 months, preferably a year. In reality, a year may be a little much for me, for some people, but if we're going to apply for a mortgage or refinance a mortgage, no hard inquiries on our credit report at all, so that way we can ensure that our credit score isn't dinged and we can get the absolute best rates of interest for that mortgage, again, saving a ton of money over the long term. So overall, credit, super interesting. Getting our score up, something that we should focus on. It influences a huge part of everyday life for a lot of people. But the score in and of itself is not the be-all, end-all. We need to focus on solid financial decisions, being on a budget if we need to, paying off our credit cards, paying down debt, investing for retirement, like all of these solid financial decisions. And if we make these solid financial decisions over time, we don't have to do any extra. We're making our payments on time. We're paying down our credit card debt. We're not taking out super expensive car loans. We're making good decisions. As a result of that, our score will naturally rise. It will naturally go up. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, make sure you give us a like. Share it with anybody who you think might benefit from it. Getting a credit score up is super important. Having a low credit score is a negative life experience. That's not something that I want. And hopefully this video can help. If you're not subscribed to the channel and you would love to know more common sense financial tips, make sure that you subscribe. Also, if you are curious why I think the credit score is super important, opposed to some opinions out there, then watch this video. In this video, I explain exactly why the credit score is an important part of our lives and why it should not be something that we ignore.